Hello and welcome everybody to WAFTA's November conversation. This time we have the pleasure of interviewing Marjorie Coleman and the team who put together her exhibition Lyrical Stitch, which is currently at the Holmes Gallery in West Perth until the 28th of November. So if you haven't seen it yet, get along there as soon as you can. Okay, so these interviews were taken over the last few weeks on Zoom, so please adjust your volume as you go through as needed. Thank you. Bye. Hello, Marjorie Coleman, and thank you for having a bit of a chat with us at your exhibition.
Great pleasure.
So tell me how you're feeling.
Well, I'm feeling very surprised, as a matter of fact. It wouldn't have occurred to me to mount anything like this if it weren't for the 6 women who've got it together, worked hard, set aside their own practice and spent a lot of time preparing this and thinking about it, and it's really almost, in a sense, their exhibition.
Well, I'm sure it's been an absolute pleasure for them to do it with you and, you know, to be working with you and to put this all together. It is phenomenal. So
I think we might have all seen enough of the work now over the months. But
yes.
Here it is anyway.
Yeah, it's a fabulous achievement, yeah.
And of course this gallery lends itself so much to this sort of thing, big pieces, and it's perfect for this display.
Yes, it certainly is. You really get you can get a good look at everything.
The
space. As you walk around, yes, the space is lovely. And it's nice, you can stand back and look and get a sense of, you know, some of the shapes are better seen at a distance.
And the proportions and all of that.
Yes, yeah. And just to see, the patterns. I'm not using very technical art language here.
Yes.
Anyway, so look, this is a really tricky question to ask you, but I was wondering, have you got a piece that is absolutely a favourite of yours?
No, I haven't. I've been asked this a number of times.
Yes.
And I can't. I think probably usually it's the last piece I've finished.
Yes.
But I have got a couple of pieces that I'm not selling because I want little pieces that I want to keep. And I suppose you could say, at the moment they're my babies, but
yes.
I'll probably, if I'm going to do something else, get over them and move on.
So they're more your most recent pieces, are they?
Fairly recent, yes.
Okay, yeah. And what stands out for me too is the range of topics and experiences that you cover in the work that you do.
Well, that's what I'm about in a way. I like to express I would like to express ideas as much as the visual impact, in a sense.
Yes.
That's why I think the titles are, with many of them, not all, are quite important because they lead you into the piece.
Yes. Wendy, I thought I'd start with you because you've known Marjorie for the longest, I believe, about 4 decades, is that right? So you've been watching her? Yeah.
We met in 1984.
Wow, okay. Yeah.
I was a young mum, my kids were just starting school and I was getting my career back on the rails. Tripped over bookmaking quite by accident. And Marjorie was a massive influence on me as a young person starting out. I'd been a painter painting Australian landscapes and wanted to now do that with textiles. And in Marjorie, I had somebody who was a fantastic inspiration because she was actually already, you know, groundbreaker in using Australian imagery in her work.
Yes.
And so she was a huge influence and a mentor. You know, I was only young, I was in my early 30s, and she guided me and gave me encouragement to do what I was doing, which was fantastic.
Yes, the exhibition itself is just amazing. So, Wendy, you've, I mean, the whole team, there's 6 of you, aren't there? Not including the photographer and the designer, I believe.
And the artist.
And yes, of course, yes.
Yeah.
So, absolutely. So, I know it was a huge team effort, and Wendy, you were primarily involved in the grant application, and that had some interesting little twists and turns. Can you just tell me quickly, you know, what happened around the grant application that you put in?
So I had been working on that for some time, building up to being ready to actually submit once we knew exactly where we were going and what to focus on with the exhibition and the book and the website. And then just as I was about to submit it, I spoke to the people at the department just to check on a couple of things, because it's a little complicated because I'm writing a grant application on Marjorie's behalf.
Yes.
Anyway, in speaking to them, they went, "Oh, don't apply yet because we're about to change it all because of COVID. So everything will change. Just hold off, and very soon we'll put some information out there, tell you how to reapply." And when the information did eventually come out, it needed a whole different focus. So I had to rewrite the grant with a different focus to meet the needs of COVID. There couldn't be any mention of working towards the exhibition. The focus had to be totally on the book and the production of the book. So,
and had you been planning a book? We had always been planning a book. So there were the 3 components. There was the exhibition, the book, and the website all would work together. Can you tell me of one particular a piece of her work that's in the exhibition that really means a lot to you, that you really engage with?
Sure. Seeing the exhibition was wonderful because I've seen every one of Marjorie's big exhibitions throughout her career, and I'm refamiliarising myself with wonderful works that I loved at the time in the 80s and the 90s, and they're still just as strong now, but I'm still equally excited by her new work. So choosing one is really hard, but
yes.
Marjorie's always been a really intelligent, strong person with strong opinions, and a lot of her work has been quite political in its manner. And there was one piece that really does strike me, the time when heaven was shut.
There we go. And
it was a work that she made due to her horror at our involvement in the Gulf War. And she was so upset about the distress that it was causing to the people involved, that she went as far as writing letters to the Prime Minister, 2 of them, saying how ashamed she was that our country would be involved in making people's lives so difficult. And what she says in association with the quilt is that she was horrified by the political and economical expediency, the manipulation of public sentiment, and the suffering that was consequent to this. And she had in mind the women and the children, and also the powerless men whose lives, not to mention their bodies and homes, were rent by the war. And this is always a problem, that the powers that be make all sorts of expedient decisions that have terrible and shocking impact on normal people's lives. And something that she felt really passionate about. And I guess making this work was a way of being able to express some of that horror that she felt.
Yes. So thank you for that, Wendy. And now that you've got Cherry there next to you as well, now both of you were involved in putting the database together. And Cherry, would you like to talk about that and what what your experience was of that side of the project?
Well, we thought it was important to actually build up a database that we could draw the information from when it came to knowing what artworks were going to be available for the exhibition, selecting them for the book, and so on. So we were very fortunate that Marjorie, over her 5 decades, has kept fairly accurate records of virtually all the pieces that she's made. And these are in loose leaf folders that we were given access to, so we could go through them, and found that there was images of the artwork, and usually it had the title, the year it was made, the materials, a statement about the ideas behind the piece, as well as details of where the piece had been exhibited, and sometimes there was a catalogue and things like that. So that was a wonderful resource for us. And the other important thing was that there was correspondence between exhibition organisers, particularly in the eastern states, and Marjorie, just talking about her pieces and her attitude to quilt making in general. She wanted to produce artworks that were made of textile but could stand in a gallery or on the wall beside prints and paintings and things like that. And once we built up our database, then part of completing that involved finding out who actually owned the artwork at the moment and whether it would be available for the exhibition. So that was an interesting exercise. In some cases, there'd be a thank you note in the folders that said, "Oh, I'm really pleased that I now own one of your artworks." But of course, it didn't actually give the title of the artwork. And so it was a bit of detective work. You say, well, okay, we've got a rough date. We know that that particular person was writing a book about textile art pieces at the time, and these are the pieces of Marjorie's that appear in the book. So we'll write to her and find out which of these she might own. And sometimes it turned out to be the ones we thought, other times, oh no, it was something completely different. These were the interesting challenges we had when it came to sourcing the artworks. And of course, a number of them had been sold to people who'd gone overseas or things like that, so we just didn't have any record. And with the COVID situation, in some cases it was very difficult. Even if we tracked down who actually owned the piece in Victoria, they were restricted on where they could go to actually obtain their pieces, especially if they were stored at someone else's house and things like that.
Yes. Yeah.
But we're very fortunate in that Marjorie's family owned a lot of the pieces still, quite a large family, so that meant that the bulk of the pieces that we wanted to exhibit were actually available to us.
Yeah, great. So Cherry, tell me, which was the piece that you've chosen?
Some of the things I particularly like about this piece basically is just red stitching on a neutral linen background, but there's such a variety of different coloured red throughout, and Marjorie's used an amazing variety of stitching to actually execute the piece. I particularly like the variation in thickness of the thread, the different textures that she's created by the way she's placed the different types of stitches. And it's the sort of piece that if you look at it, every time you look at it, you see something different.
Yes.
It includes insects and birds and other kinds of plants, as well as various, insects, birds and other kinds of animals, as well as various plant matter. And in some places it seems to be layers that are on top of each other, and if you look into it, then you can see more detail every time you look at it.
Yeah.
The other thing I would say about it, in places, just the natural background fabric has been left with the outline of the creature stitched, and this just breaks up the whole stitching overall. So,
yes. Yeah, I'll just stop the share there. Okay. Well, thank you both very much. And have you got anything that you want to kind of round off with at all?
Well, just what a privilege it's been to be part of this project. It was a project that absolutely had to be done because it was so worthwhile. And Marjorie's been a great friend to all of us for so long, and her work is so wonderful that we just felt that it needed to be seen and it needed to be acknowledged.
Marian, if we can start with you first of all, can you tell me what your role was in the in getting the exhibition up and going?
I think my primary role was as record keeper. I'm a compulsive note taker, so it became obvious that I would just record all of the meetings and decisions being made. The other thing I had a significant role in was the budgeting. The fact that we had to figure out how much things were going to cost, how much Marjorie was willing to spend, and using that budget as a tool to make decisions rather than just as something set in stone. So it was always fluid until we knew exactly what we were doing. The other thing is I have a background in research, so whenever there's a question of how to do something, what to do, I was usually pretty good at finding a set of answers so we can make decisions better.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, great, thank you. So yeah, it's really essential to be able to keep the whole thing together and moving along, so and problem solving as you go. So in terms of the role, you know, I know that it was a big team effort and you shared roles. So there was a role that you shared with Cherry, which was around getting the gallery space organised. So can you, Cherry, can you tell me a bit about that?
Well, when we first started planning for the exhibition at the beginning of last year, we visited a few galleries and inquired about the possibility of showing Marjorie's work there. And in most cases, they were booked up for at least 2 years in advance. So we had to take a different approach so that we could actually have something a bit earlier. So then we looked at smaller spaces where we could just show Marjorie's most recent work for the past 10 years. And that was where we ended up at the Shopfront Gallery at Central Tape.
And that was last year, wasn't it?
Yes.
Yeah. Mm.
And so that meant that we could expose Marjorie's work to an audience and just see if there was any interest in taking it to the next step of a major survey exhibition of her work from the past 5 decades.
Mm.
And as a result of that, we got offers from Central Tape to do it in the big gallery. And we also were made aware that Fremantle Arts Centre might be interested. And when Janet Holmes bought her piece from Marjorie, there was also a lot of interest there. And part of what we had to really think about is what space would be most conducive to showing Marjorie's work well. And it became clear pretty quickly that there was so much work that a small space such as Central Tape wasn't going to really allow us to show what we wanted to show. And it was actually on a visit to Holmes Court Gallery for Leslie Meany's artist talk during her exhibition that Leticia and found Marjorie and I and introduced herself, and then brought Janet over. And that was the first moment that Janet actually said, Marjorie, I would really like to hold an exhibition here because I've heard there are hundreds of quilts hiding in closets. And I would like to see them. And that began the discussion. Eventually we had a meeting with Leticia, and Janet wasn't there at that one. But that's when the details were worked out as to whether it would be an exhibition held by the gallery or whether it would be us renting space. And again, that's when budgeting had to be looked at and how much money was involved and what our responsibilities were versus what the gallery's responsibilities were.
Mm-hmm. All right. Yes, well, yeah, Janet is such an amazing patron of the arts in general, and it's, you know, I've seen a few exhibitions over the years where she's had exhibitions for textiles, and yeah, it's so good that she saw that opportunity, and yeah, was willing to, well, you know, very keen to run with it from what I hear. Yeah.
It was actually interesting to watch the interaction between Marjorie and Janet, because this was the first time they met.
Yes.
And it was like he's in a pod talking about things. So it was really quite
Wow.
interesting. And Keisha and I went off to the side and started working out the details of how this was going to happen while they were just having a great chat.
Yes, yeah. Oh, that's fantastic. So although Janet had bought a piece of Marjorie's work, they hadn't actually met before.
No, it's because Janet wasn't able to come and pick up the piece, and it had to be picked up from John Mullen's studio in Fremantle, and it was actually Janet's husband who picked it up. So they'd never had an opportunity to.
Now, Marian, as I've asked all of you, have you got a piece that specifically is a favourite of yours out of the work that's in the gallery, in the exhibition?
Plain favourites is one I've never seen before.
Okay, I'll bring it up on the screen. Just hang on, or just see what we can get. So, right. Thank you, Marian. Tell me what you love about this.
What I love about it is the rhythm. There's all of the rhythm in the composition, the rhythm in the use of color, and then the rhythm in the use of stitch. And it's one of her pieces that as soon as I see it, I start to smile.
Yes.
That's what I love about so much of her work, is that it brings just that feeling of a smile to it. And in fact, that was one of the reasons I was willing to work hard with this exhibition, is to get so many of her pieces that I'd heard about, never seen, and had heard were either with family members or in her closets. And it was sort of a selfish way to get to see work I could never otherwise have never seen. So.
Well, yes. Well, I applaud your selfishness. It's been a great gift to the rest of us to be able to see all this work. It's been phenomenal. So, yeah. So well done. Thank you. Tell me what you were working together on, Jan.
The big one was curation of the exhibition, curation and hanging. The book was quite a team effort, but yeah, we all did our part on the book.
Yes. So mainly you were working with Marjorie on the curation part of it?
Yeah, I think that's where we worked together most, choosing the artworks, selecting for the hang, preparing them for the hang, and hanging them, being in the gallery when they were hung. That was fantastic.
Yes, that must have been wonderful.
A wonderful experience.
Exciting.
Yeah.
Yes. So, tell me, Jan, any particular experiences or anything that sort of stands out for you over the 7 months that you were doing this? I mean, that's such a
big question, because there were so many parts to this project. We all worked together, we all had our roles, but those roles sort of morphed a bit too, in and out as people did things, and as we worked out what we were doing too. A hindsight thing, we would do it so much easier and quicker and sweeter. But yeah, so it was one of those projects that we had to make up as we went along, even though we planned very well for it. Yeah. The best part for me was that last few days in at Holmes Court Gallery, getting the works hung, and then having the book delivered too, that we'd worked on all year as well. So it was wonderful.
Yes, I bet. And as I've said before, just fantastic that you've created such a brilliant, that your whole team has created such a brilliant experience and sort of quality in terms of the exhibition, and the book is fabulous, because I'm sure there are going to be a lot of people that are going to want that book after the exhibition as well. It's something that I think will certainly, have quite a long life. It's beautiful, really lovely.
Because it tells the story of Marjorie and her life, but it tells the story of a lot of our lives in a way that we've done so much with so little acknowledgement. And but luckily, Marjorie's work, she's got so many works, and we had enough to pull off a big shebang like this.
Okay. Well, thank you, Jan. So Marjorie, moving over to you now. Tell me what inspired you to get involved with this exhibition?
Iris, I've known Marjorie and her work since the 1980s.
Oh.
And I've always thought it was amazing how she was able to tell a story in ways that were different from everyone else. And it didn't matter what she was doing, you knew it would be interesting.
Yes.
That's been part of it. And I suppose, as I said, I've known her work and Marjorie since the 1980s. And she particularly inspired me because I lived in Kalgoorlie, and in the 1980s I came to Perth once for a textile related activity, and Marjorie happened to be at the same workshop, and she showed some of her quilts, and they were unlike anything that I'd ever seen before. So that was the start of my interest in her work, and it's continued through all the various iterations. I did a review for the second Razor's Edge exhibition that was held by WAQA, and Marjorie had a beautiful work in there, and I re-engaged again in the 1990s with what she was doing, and from then on I've been following her work and loving her work. So that's really what inspired me, was just the fact that her work is all so different from everyone else's, and she's an amazing creative artist.
Yes,
and
there's
to be told.
Yeah, and it's there's such an amazing range of topics, the social commentary, political stuff, and that strong sense of applying a woman, what's traditionally known as women's work, into something that is really very strong. And the poetry as well is really interesting. Did you have some involvement in that too, Marjorie?
Well, we all had some involvement in that we all saw the poems that Marjorie was happy for us to see. There's other poetry I know that she didn't want Sophie to transcribe for us. The poetry is such an insight into how she was, and I know that I could identify with some of the things she'd said as a young mother, the desperation almost in her voice. And I particularly love the fact that the poetry is in the book, and that the whole book, other than the invited writers, is all Marjorie's words. And that was one of the exciting things, Jan, wasn't it? When because one of the things I was doing was finding information, and I remember one day Jan and I were here in the studio, we're supposedly looking at artworks, but I was looking at the same time at the words, and when we got very excited. We got incredibly excited, particularly when we saw the one about a funny thing happened in 1972 on the way to 1973. That whole quote in the book is fantastic, and that gave us a great buzz, didn't it? It really did.
Yeah, but it certainly adds to the book, but it adds to the whole picture of who Marjorie is. She comes very amazing intellect, and as well as her skills, the hand skills and all the other skills.
Yeah. It's certainly a very it's a rounded picture. You know, that's the feeling I have too. So it's just beautiful that you were able to bring all those things together. So well done.
I reckon.
She is.
Sorry, what was that, Jan?
Big package in a little bod.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. So Marjorie, now you've chosen one. Well, would you like to talk about two works? I know you couldn't. You like both of these equally. So, shall we go to the first one that you've chosen, which was Dull Flower?
I love the contrast that she has achieved in this. Banksias aren't very bright plants. The flowers are spectacular, but she's used the yellow in it, which takes the eye to the birds. I really love the flowing lines of the tree itself. And that's one of the things that I love about her work is her use of line, because line is a passion of mine. So anytime someone has used line incredibly well, I find it very stimulating and very interesting. I just really love the whole work. I initially wasn't sure about the Banshees along the side done in a more traditional style, but I felt, well, that was a way of connecting back to traditional quilt making. So it's perfect in that. I just really like the whole work, and it actually reminds me of what I like about all of her work. Her use of contrast, her use of value, her use of line, and that applies to all my favourites in this exhibition, and there are many. It's an icon piece in her development, because she had been doing Hawaiian style work about Australian plants, and the Dollflower series, she's branched out from that, and so that's a significant time in her development. And this one, I think, is one of the most successful of the 5 Dollflowers. It's saying, I'm going somewhere else, and that's what I like about it.
Marjorie, Fashion Babes.
This, I think, is another example of one of the icon periods of Marjorie's life, when she was doing lots and lots of work about sea creatures, and particularly weedy sea dragons. And what was the other one? There were 2 sorts. She'll probably tell me it's the wrong one. Leafy sea dragons. Yeah. Leafy sea dragons and weedy sea dragons. And I can't tell the difference between them, Iris, but I think they're beautiful. And I feel when I look at that piece, I'm seeing the same shapes, the same negative shapes, and the same positive shapes that I saw in the Banksia piece. And that, to me, is a wonderful part of Marjorie's work. It's the fluidity of her line and how she connects all the items in the work through the use of line. And this one, of course, although it's embroidery, to me, it's full of line. So again, I think it's gorgeous. Have you got anything to say about that one?
Colour's always interesting.
Yes.
Marjorie's use of colour.
Yes.
So I can just see from what I'm looking at, the yellows under the neck of the top one are jumping out and then carried down everywhere. It's just beautiful. Pastel colour's not usually my favourite, but she does them. Does them so perfectly.
She does.
Yeah.
She does.
She
so
brings
beautifully
pastels to life. Yeah, absolutely.
So and the fact that it's only 40 centimetres square means it's a little jewel. So it has a special.
Yeah. And all done on sheer fabric too.
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh yes. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
Yes.
I just love the name of it too.
And her titles are so good, aren't they? Of course, these are Fashion Babes. These are absolutely gorgeous. Much better than seeing something on the catwalk.
Welcome, Marjorie Coleman and Jan Mullen. Marjorie, I just love how you have depicted the natural flora of Western Australia, and I'm just interested in knowing what it was that motivated you to do the flora, the local flora. Yeah.
I can't really tell you what motivated me. I don't know. It just seemed to me that they were my surroundings. We had 20 acres up near Gingin, West Gingin, that my husband used to go up there and fiddle around, and I used to go up and fiddle around a bit and draw the plants. But I don't know. I'm not entirely sure that it's not a reaction to my English mother, who always thought that anything English was the tops and anything Australia was the bottom. And I think maybe there's a certain reaction to that, although it's not conscious on my part at all. But that must be something of the soil that this grew out of, so to speak. I can't answer that question really, except it seemed to be the natural surroundings that I'm in and grew up with, and so that's what you turn to, rather than imported cliche
Yes.
plant that everyone grows and all look the same.
Yes. Well, and also that, I mean, if you had that sort of, I'm calling it a bush block, is that sort of right?
Yes.
Right. Yeah. To have had that space around you, you would have just, I mean, how could you have ignored what was flying in and out with birds and,
Yes.
you know, that, and just seeing them in the banksia trees and all that sort of thing, there's so much going on. If you're an observant sort of person, then that's, I would think that would be quite a natural.
And I also spent 5 or 6 years as a very young child. We had a farm at Denmark, Wheaton Hill, and I spent time 5 or 6 years there as a very young child until about 7 or 8 we went into Albany. So I've always been surrounded by bush, I suppose. I wasn't conscious of it, but that must be something of in the mind.
Yes. Some kind of, sorry.
The Australian bush, the plants, the design that is totally wonderful, isn't it, compared to a rose?
Yes.
To look at a banksia and to break that down and use it as a design source.
Absolutely, and even the leaves of Australian plants are all so different. The bushes are so different that even if they're not in flower, they're interesting and they've got shapes that are worth exploring and so on.
Yeah.
The Australian bushes are wonderful.
It's not wussy, is it?
No, not at all. Not
wussy. No. And I'm just thinking as you're talking about it, there's so much texture as well. You know, like the banksia, as you say, when it's not flowering, it's got those beautiful, soft, furry bits. You know, the new growth.
Yes.
Just amazing.
And all individual and all so different.
Yeah.
Shapes.
Yes, that's right. And then things that look soft as prickly as hell, and other things that look pricklier, just soft and easy. Yeah. So, no, and I just love how you've brought that, you know, sort of that focus for us as artists, textile artists, to be able to see that in the exhibition. And 50 years is a, you know, prodigious amount of time to be doing that work.
A bit here and a bit there, you know how it is.
Yeah. Well, I suppose that's it. You don't, as you were actually doing it, you're not aware of building a body of work, which is what you've been
not at all.
Mm.
Just on to the next. What's new? What can I think about now?
Excuse me. So, what is it that attracted you to textile art? Why didn't you do painting or?
Oh, well, I did go to art school after uni, of course. Some years later, I went to Claremont School of Art and did painting and drawing and a bit of textile. But I didn't really have any talent that way. And besides, everyone else was doing stuff that I thought was rather dull and rather boring and rather obvious. And this wasn't a conscious thing, but I don't know, women's work, I don't know, while you're looking after kids. See, I'm the generation that couldn't work after we were married.
Yes.
We weren't given jobs. And so you had to do something that engaged your mind and your time. And I just stitched naturally, because even as a little kid, I can remember when I was about 5 or 6, making a thing for my aunt, a lavender, lost the word, you know, a little lavender.
Those little bags.
Yes, that's it. And when I was 5 or 6, so then I stitched dolls' clothes and kids' clothes, my clothes. I always made my own clothes, and so on and so on. One thing leads to another. Textiles just came naturally.
Yeah. I guess what keeps you going with the art? You've been stitching continually.
Well, I'm winding down quite considerably now. I'm just finishing something off, and I realise my stitchery is very gross and rather wobbly, and I'm not what it was, if you're in terms of fine stitchery, which I'm not particularly, but I think I'm probably done my last piece.
We did tell her to stop a couple of months ago, basically because we just kept, another one. Another one.
You've got to put on.
Haven't got space.
Yes.
Well, I love the more recent work as well. I think it's so, it's ephemeral and just beautiful. I just love how you use the stitch to create the negative space as well. You know, they the shapes of the birds and the other animals and things that you depict in your work.
You've got to learn that in drawing, don't you, really? You draw, that comes from a drawing background. Well, I won't say background, that sounds too accomplished, but
it's discipline.
Discipline, thank you, Jan, yes.
Well, thank you very much, Marjorie. It's just a delightful exhibition. So, I believe it was you who first thought of, well, you had a conversation with Marjorie when you were doing some photography for her.
Yes, that's how the whole project started this year, but it actually started last year when we did the first exhibition at Shopfront Gallery. And that all came about because my friend Julie and we photographed Marjorie's work, and I had just taken one of her works off the wall to give back to her, and I just turned and said, we need to do an exhibition for you. We being the group that got together to do the whole shebang. And she just said, yes.
Good.
Now I've done it.
Okay, so you put your foot in it by saying we should do an exhibition. Marjorie said yes.
Absolutely. But I knew I had the backing of everyone. Everyone would be right into it. So we got that exhibition done in about 7 months or so from start to finish, something like that. And that the starting point was that we had to go and do the research, we didn't have a database going then, but I started going through all Marjorie's files, the history of her artworks, and putting the years, chronological order, and inputting everything. So we had all the detail, sizes, measurements, materials, artist statements, all that was necessary to basically build a catalogue. So we started that last year, and then Sophie Coleman came on board this year and did a proper database. So we've got it all spread out. It was made this year much easier, and we continually referred to it. Still mistakes, finding different measurements or all sorts of things, going from imperial to metric and working it out. There was a lot.
Having to standardise all that sort of thing.
And we didn't get it all right. I know when the book came out, one of us realised that, it was a person who owns one of the artworks. He said, still in inches. But that might have just been So it's that stuff that just goes through the cracks. But big job.
Yes, big job. Massive amount of material to document. Yes. And as well as, actually have the exhibition. I mean, the two parts of I'm saying two parts, the exhibition and the book, but then there's all the bits that go in behind to create those.
Yes, and you have that infrastructure in place, all that done. And that behind the scenes stuff is the killer, really. Yes. And it makes breaks what you do too. But we're lucky the team did assign tasks, basically. We all had our specialities. Yes.
Yes, and I heard that, although coronavirus has been a real sort of, with the arts and everything else, who was I talking to? Marian, I think, said that, and Cherry, when I interviewed them, Marian said, it gave us time. And Cherry said, usually we had trips booked and all this sort of thing, but they weren't able to do that.
Yes.
So, coronavirus had some good...
It certainly wasn't a hindrance. It helped.
Yes, yeah. So, I mean, that's a fabulous story about an art form in a sense, a good art story, because there's so many around where people have been really having to cancel so many of their events and that sort of thing. So it's fantastic. Brilliant that you just kept going.
We had to. We had a deadline. Because when we did the exhibition last year, we knew that we wanted to do a full retrospective, but we weren't going to do it this year. It was going to be next year. But
really?
Yes. We didn't have the energy or everything in place to do it this year. And then we were so lucky that Janet Holmes at Court offered us Holmes at Court Gallery this year, and we all had to say yes.
So a big gulp.
Oh, very big gulp.
Oops. Okay.
Not swear words, just gulping.
Yes.
And
Jan.
so thrilled to be involved with Holmes Court. They've been brilliant, really good.
Yes.
Really good.
Yeah, certainly. Yeah.
And it's also it enabled us to fit all the works that we wanted into the gallery. It's
yeah,
pretty,
I can't imagine another space being as appropriate. You know, it's just
so
brilliant.
Yeah.
Fabulous. So
hard.
sorry.
They worked so hard. Every one of them worked so hard, and they've got their own practices to attend to. You know, I can't tell you how much I admire what they've all done.
Yes. Yeah. Fabulous team. Brilliant.
Yes.
And just such a lovely honouring of you, Marjorie, that that they've done that. No.
Admiration, certainly.
Yes, that's what it is. It's a mutual.
Yeah.
And we're all still talking.
Yes. So Jan, tell me, there's a piece that I asked you to choose a piece that you really like. Can you see that?
I can see it. Yeah, it's
Okay.
one of the 10 Search for the Tree of Life series, and that has to be my favourite series. And this, and I probably should say why it's my favourite series. It's not the subject matter, it's the imagery, the birds and the plants, which is what it's all about. That's your depiction, isn't it? Everyone is the birds and the plants. Every one of the 10 is an iteration of different birds and plants to tell the story, and there's technique change, there's thread change. It's if we got in close to the grapes in this particular one, you just see how many colours they're made up of. There's just little lines. It's like the most delicious etching, and I love etchings. The same on the bird. There's just beautiful colour work, stitch work. And the design, if you look at the bird, broken off on the tail down below, displayed feathers, you know, not a proper wing, but depicting the wing with these splayed feathers. Just, it's just fantastic. And the almost wreath-like array of the plants too, or halo. It's not depicted as such, and perhaps it isn't anything like that, but that's what it means to me. It's this serenity, almost like heaven.
And it's on sheer fabric, isn't it?
Yes.
Which that's a real challenge, because how do you stop the back shining, showing through?
And the threads are beautiful. I don't know what is it, a pearl something? It's a beautiful sheen.
Just an ordinary.
Is it? Yeah, I thought there's a bit of sheen on it.
There might be occasionally, but not.
It glows, as they all do in this series. Oh no, not all of them. Some of them are on linen, but the ones that really speak to me are the sheer ones that that work like that. So fantastic. There's nothing I could change in that, except if I owned it. You know,
if you owned it,
that would be the change.
Yes, I love it too. I just love the movement in there. I have a lot of those wattle birds in my garden, and they are so funny. They're so bossy, and Marjorie, I think you've just captured their flappiness. You know, they're very sort of busy the way they fly.
Yeah, they clack around and boss the others, and yet they're very delicate with the plants.
Amazing. Oh, well, that is beautiful, and I love it too. I think that's just such a beautiful piece of work. So I'll stop the screen share there. Have you got anything more you wanted to say, Jan, before I come off that?
Nothing comes to mind, except that we are so lucky to have Marjorie.
And vice versa.
Yeah.
Yes. Yes, absolutely. Yeah, I totally agree. Applaud. It's been delightful talking with you. So thank you and goodbye.
Thank you,
Iris.
Bye.